Cool. So, yeah, we can go ahead and kick off here. Like I said, my name is Matt. You're joining us for CARTO for 60 minutes, and we're going to try to cover everything that, yeah, about CARTO in about an hour. So that's our goal for today. For our agenda, a few different pieces we have here. We'll just do a quick kind of intro to the platform itself, understanding what makes CARTO tick and how everything works. We'll get you signed up for CARTO if you don't have an account already. If you do have an account, you can just go ahead and use yours. Totally works just fine. And then we'll give you a quick tour of CARTO in the workspace and everything there. We'll get you connected to your data sources. CARTO comes with a pre-designated data warehouse, so we'll be using that for the majority of the demo. But if you do want to connect yours, we'll show you exactly how easy it is to do that as well. We'll talk about the Data Explorer, and as you can see here, it's a little bit more than Data Explorer. There's a lot of different things you can actually do from that interface and enrich your data and create tile sets and do all these really cool things. So we'll be covering that too. Then we'll be talking about our data observatory, which allows you to enrich with thousands of data sources, your data, or actually just use that yourself. And then something I'm really excited for is workflows. This is a newer component to our platform that actually allows you to build spatial workflows visually and execute those on your data warehouse. It's really cool, and we'll actually be pulling in a live demo there to do that. Then we'll create a map. Obviously, the visualization is kind of what we're known for, but we'll actually create some maps and dashboards and be able to do that. And then we'll touch on the Analytics Toolbox, is briefly talk about what you can do with that and frankly what it is and how all that works together. So that's our agenda for today. If you're not familiar with CARTO, this is your first time kind of interacting with us. This is a little bit about us. We work with just over 2,200 customers. There's 200 folks working on our team. And we work with people all over the globe. As you can see here, we have people from literally everywhere joining in. So very excited to have that. And we work with a lot of different, companies from lots of different areas. What I love most about working here is, frankly, we get to work on so many different spatial problems, from telecommunication companies to insurance companies to, within the public sector, to delivery tech startups, sports teams, consumer packaged goods, retail. I mean, you name it, we've done it. And that's really fun, is that we get to see so many different things. And frankly, I learn a lot too every single day. So that's why I'm excited to do this. And I really enjoy it. So what is CARTO at the core? Well, we'll kind of give you an understanding of what CARTO does. Is that a few different things, that's an end-to-end platform, and we'll show you exactly how we go from data all the way to, kind of finished analyst product or dashboard or something like that. But the core is that you can take something and go from end to end, get everything that you have there together. So that's kind of the end goal for what CARTO does. And the other part is cloud native. So everything we do is in the cloud. We're a cloud first product. Well, we do, everything that scales, dynamically within the cloud. We host our maps in the cloud. So if you're coming from a desktop GIS background, that's probably the single biggest difference that you'll see is actually doing it there, is actually scaling that way. So CARTO at the core really is kind of like a sandwich with a little layer in the middle. That's the way I like to think about it. On your layer here at the bottom, you have your data source. And there's really 5 data sources that we connect to. It's a little bit more than that, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But the first is that there's kind of 4 core data warehouses that we connect to. That's Google BigQuery, Snowflake, Amazon Redshift, and Databricks. Those are the big 4 there. And then PostgreSQL. So obviously, PostGIS, you can host PostGIS in many different places. And there's also many different Azure services that are Postgres enabled that allow you to connect those in as well. So anything that's Postgres enabled with PostGIS, you can connect into CARTO as well. And then in the middle is this kind of illustrated by these nice little octopus tentacles here, are basically our ability to connect in and work between the two. It's a very basic API layer that allows you to communicate from multiple interfaces within CARTO that you see here back to the data warehouse. Now, this is probably like the most important thing, is that we don't take data out of your database, out of your data warehouse, and bring it into CARTO. A lot of platforms do that. Why we don't do that is that we believe that the data and the power of those computing environments and the databases and data warehouses should stay there. And that's how we're able to scale to really large volumes of data and analysis at scale and work with, massive number of rows or features or anything like that, is that we just basically take that information from our front end that you're programming in, pushing it back down to the data warehouse, letting that amazing superpower and computing power run that, and then get the results back. So that happens through a number of different interfaces, as you see here at the bottom. All these we'll talk about today, apart from the one at the end, which is spatial applications. That's a whole other topic, but anything you can do in CARTO, you can build your own custom application and do that with. So that's another whole topic for another day. But just so you know that we're going to talk about the core workspace interface, which includes these 5 things here. And then you can scale that into your own application should you want to take that a little bit further. Now, in a much more detailed view, this is kind of what that looks like here. You basically have your cloud platforms and your data warehouses that I mentioned at the bottom here. That's that first layer. And then you have the ability to kind of connect and query that with that API layer that you're seeing here. So if you see that API layer, map, SQL, location data services, and import API, that allows you to communicate back and forth. Now we have, of course, the data observatory in there as well. That data lives in that data warehouse, and you can query that, which is over 11,000 different data sets that you can use. Some are paid. There's a fee for some of those, but a majority of them are actually open data sets that you can go ahead and use. So we'll check those out and play around with some of those today. And then the Analytics Toolbox. So a lot of these data warehouses have a core spatial functionality in them. You can do things like creating buffers, or you can create lines, or do spatial joins and things like that. All of those things exist, but there's a whole other segment of things that we bring to the table to actually extend that. Doing spatial statistics, if you think of spatial data science, those types of functions, we bring those in as well. The enrichment functions to enrich between data sets, either your data set and another data set, or your data set and data in our data observatory. You can do that quite effectively there. So there's all these other pieces, including geocoding and tiling and all these different pieces that you can bring in and scale from there. So lots of different things that you can do with that. And then at the top here is that platform. Like I said, that it's the same type of concept here, is that we have analytical workflows, visualizations, and exporting, and then development toolkits there. Now, the interface that we will be working with today is our workspace. So that is where it's kind of like your core way to access CARTO, is that you can access your maps, your workflows, data observatory, data explorer, your cloud connections, and then you can get access to those developer tools as well, all in that interface. So first kind of question is, if you want to post this in the chat, do you already use CARTO and are familiar with CARTO? If you want to say, yes or no, just throw that in chat. Say, yes, I've used it before, or no, this is my first time kind of playing around with CARTO. Love to see some of your responses there. If you do have a CARTO account, you can go ahead and log into that. If you don't, we'll walk through getting over to carto.com and actually signing up for that as well. So you can actually get set up there. So I see we have a lot of first timers here. So we'll walk through that process to sign up for your account. And then the only other thing is that you have to download this file here. This is a GeoParquet file of storms in the United States, pulled from NOAA, our National Weather Service here in the United States. And we'll actually use that to illustrate the import process. So we'll post this link into the chat here so you can download that. And if this is your first time, we'll walk through the sign up process here. So can everyone still see my screen? All right, perfect. So the first thing you want to do is head over to carto.com to get signed up. This is our brand new website. So if you want to take a look at here, we just launched our new webpage. So we're pretty happy and excited about that. The first thing you need to do is actually go over to this button here, try for free. So you can go ahead and click that. And that's going to take you to this sign up process. So you can sign up. This will be a 14-day trial period that you can get access to do whatever you want. If you're a student, you can actually access this using the GitHub Student Developer Pack. So if you have a student account, you can sign up using this process as well. For today, though, you can still create the trial and go from there. So the first thing you do is enter your email address. You can put that in here and then a password. So let's do matt@carto.com and then a password that I want to use. We'll just create something simple. And I think I do everything. Oh, hopefully I'll remember that later. And then, yeah, you can go ahead and hit get started here. If you want to sign in with Google, you can do that as well. So you just go ahead and hit get started. That's going to take you in. You'll get an email, and then you just have to click and go through that email. So go ahead and follow that process. If you hit any bumps in the road, let me know, and you can actually check that out and get the verification email. What I'll do on my end is illustrate that through our documentation. So in our docs here, we actually walk through signing up and going through that. So you'll get that email. You'll actually click the verification email and they'll say, hey, we verified that. And then you can finish your setup. The only other thing you need to do once you've set that up is create your organization. Now, every account is tied to some sort of organization. This organization is effectively going to be you for this purpose. So you can go ahead and set that up. And you can create your own organization that way. So what you can do is sign that up. If you do have an account or an organization that's already been established under your domain name, in this case, if you have it at carto.com, we have our own. So that would detect that. It might invite you to join that. For Gmail, you don't really have to worry about that. If you want to create a new organization, you just go ahead and put that in. That can be anything you want to call it. You can call it your name or whatever. It can be anything you want there, and then where you want your region to run. So there's different cloud regions that you have access to, and probably you want to choose one that's closer to you. So we have Europe West, USA Central. That's just where the physical data center lives. Asia Northeast, and then Australia Southeast. So you can kind of pick one that's closest to you and set it up that way. The next thing is you just need to put in your personal information here, your business profile, and then click finish. So that's what that will look like. And then you are ready to go ahead and get started. So as you go through that, if you hit any bumps in the road, feel free to throw that into the chat and just call it out and say, having trouble here, whatever that might be. But yeah, as we go through that, I will kind of keep covering some of the core elements of the CARTO workspace here. So any questions, just throw those in the chat. Once you're all logged in, if you just want to say I'm set or logged in or in the chat, just to let me know you're good. I'll keep an eye on that to make sure we're moving along at a good pace here. So before we do that, I just wanted to point out two other resources to you. The first is the documentation. This has all of the technical documentation you'll need in CARTO. That's just docs.carto.com, as you can see here. The second is Academy. So there's more tutorials here that you can actually use and carry forward after the webinar. So there's a lot you can do here at academy.carto.com. A ton of different workshops. There's different things you can do, understanding, geospatial data fundamentals or optimizing your data, spatial indexes, all this different stuff. So there's a ton you can take forward even just after this workshop. So we're kind of giving you the lay of the land here, and then you can take this forward to do everything that you want to do there. So those are two key important resources that I want to kind of cover so you know where those are as well. And then once again, just getting access to this URL here. I'll go ahead and post that in the chat. So that's a file that we'll use to actually import. So yeah, thanks, Eli. So you're logged in. Anyone else, if you just kind of say logged in, did not get a verification email, I would check if you didn't get a verification email, just check maybe your spam or anything like that. All right, looks like people are getting logged in. Awesome. So yeah, for the person who just didn't see the email, just check your junk. It may have gone to a spam or something like that, or sometimes it does take a minute to get there. So just double check that. But I see most people are getting logged in, which is great. So we'll go ahead and kind of get started with the full tutorial here. So when you log into CARTO, you'll see a screen like this. Now, your organization, if you have an existing organization, will have some maps in it, maybe not. Otherwise, you won't be actually seeing some of these different things. But this is the CARTO workspace, and I'll just kind of give you the very quick tour of everything here. If you ever need help, you can actually grab your help topics over here using the question mark. Any account settings you can see over here. And then this is really where everything lives. You can go back to the homepage here, and then we have our different components here. Applications, which I said we won't have time to check on today, but we'll talk through that later. The connections, which is where we'll start in a moment. Data Observatory, which is where all the data sets and you can see from the publicly available data live. The Data Explorer, which is where we will move after the connections to actually see what data we have and check that out. Workflows, which is actually building those analytic workflows, and then finally maps. So everything you can kind of see here in this left-hand menu, that's kind of where the core of everything is. You can still access all those pieces here. So you can see your recent maps, recent workflows, recently used data, and then, some different things from our blog posts and stuff like that. So there's different, updates and alerts and things like that here. So that's kind of the very quick tour, to kind of go through everything of what we have. So our first step is actually, before you do anything, you have to create and establish a connection in CARTO. Now, all of your accounts, let me click out of that, will come with this CARTO data warehouse connection. So you should be able to actually see, where the CARTO data warehouse is. Let me see if I can just turn this on here. And you can actually go through and go through the data warehouse here. So this is the connection we'll be using today. Since everyone has access to it, you don't need to do any extra steps to do that. But yeah, you can actually go through and actually check those out. Now, if you do want to create a new connection, all you have to do is hit new connection here. And these are like I said, the 5 different connection types that we have available. And yeah, depending on what your data warehouse is, you can go ahead and select that. If you're using BigQuery, you can just follow the steps here to connect in. If you use a service account, or you can sign in with your Google account. If you have GCP, you can use that there. If you want to use Postgres, all you have to do is basically have the name of your connection, the server, username, password, database, and port. And then there's some options here to actually make this public or private. So if it's just you in the organization, you could make this available to your entire organization, or not. We also have the option, should you have groups in your organization, to share those. But if it's just you, you can go ahead and check those out and see those. There are some advanced options here, depending on some different kind of components there. Same thing for Redshift and Snowflake. There are some steps you may need to do to actually install the Analytics Toolbox. We won't need to touch all of those today, but that would be sort of an administrative process for the CARTO data warehouse connection that's already installed in there, so you don't have to worry about that. But for pretty much everything we're doing today, we'll just be using the core functions in your data warehouse or database. And like I said, they're already set up in the CARTO data warehouse itself. So you can check out all these as you go forward. If you ever have any issues or anything like that, getting the Analytics Toolbox set up, you can always reach out to our support. You can always find that here in the help section to get in touch with us if you have any questions. So as you go forward after this, if you're trying to connect that up, just let us know and we'll be able to help you there. So once a connection is established, you can actually see that in your connections list here. So I'll go to one of my connections. This is my connection here, and you can always edit and adjust that. So if you want to change that, this one is just linked to my CARTO account, or sorry, my Google Cloud account, and that's linked in. I can share this or keep it private or public or whatever I want to do there. And then I can always remove that or delete it. But what I can always see here is that, this is tied to 9 different maps, or this one's tied to 2 different maps, and what my project ID and everything there is. So that's pretty much it. Once that's connected, you're connected directly to that data source. So you're hooked in. You can use any data that you have there already. If you don't have any data there, don't worry. We'll get that in a minute. So that's pretty much connections. It's that pretty simple, usually a 5-minute process to get that set up. And then if you need to install the Analytics Toolbox, a few extra steps there to go through, but really nothing that creates it too difficult. So like I said, for what we're doing today, we're using this CARTO data warehouse connection. If you have any questions on that, it's a nice little, primer here to tell you about what that is and where that lives and some different things there. So from there, we'll go ahead and proceed into the next section to actually kind of get some data into our CARTO data warehouse. To do that, I'll have you navigate back over to this left bar here and click on Data Explorer. So the Data Explorer is actually a little bit more than just a data explorer. There's a lot that you can actually do from this interface. The first thing is on this left-hand menu here. If you see under connections, we'll shortly have a list of all the different connections we have in our data warehouse. And you can see we have quite a few in our organization here. So you can actually select those and see what those look like. So you'll be looking for this one. It might be only one of the options you have. It's called CARTO data warehouse. And you can just open that up. And what you'll see here is that you can actually explore the data in these 2 locations. The organization data, you'll see that there's public and private data here. So some of this data, if it's private, that means it's your data. No one else can see that. Or if it's public, it's shared with your entire organization. So this is data that's been shared with our organization here. In the demo data section, there's also demo data that we provide that you can use. So this is data that everyone gets access to. And you can see here, there's lots of different data sets that we have. So lots of different things here that we can actually take a look at. There's also the concept of demo tile sets, which are tile maps that we've created for large amounts of data that you can actually use. So if you want to use any of these as a visual layer, go ahead. That's there and available for you. But for now, let's just go ahead and open demo tables, and let's take a look at cell towers worldwide. So if you want to go ahead and click on that, you'll see this pop up here, and you'll see a basic rendering of that data. So this is actually what's happening right now, is that we're rendering that data live directly from that connection, and you can actually see that. And you should be able to zoom in and get a visual view of that data to see where all these cell towers are. You can actually get a preview of that data to see what that looks like in the data here. So you can see all the different information tied to that data set. This data is from, it's called OpenCell ID. So it's a data provider that basically has, every cell tower that they've mapped in their open database. The locations are somewhat anonymized, so they're not perfect. So if you go back to the map here, you'll actually see that there's cell towers in water here, which obviously isn't real. They do kind of move those locations slightly just for anonymization purposes, but for the most part, they're within a few, certain, meter distance of that location. So not too far off, as it were. You can also see the total size of the data. So what we're looking at is 43 million rows here, or just over, and about a 6 GB file. This was last updated 9 months ago. But as you can see here, as you zoom in and out, probably the most interesting thing is kind of the speed that you can actually render this data at. Now, this data isn't tiled. It isn't, we're not pre-generating these tiles. It's actually rendering live. And that's one of the most powerful attributes about CARTO, is that we're actually to be able to query this amount of data and render it so quickly on the front end that allows you to scale. And we do this by dynamically dropping some features. So we're not actually showing 43 million rows on this map. You can see it gives a overview and generalizes that data on these higher zoom levels for the same visual effect. Underneath, though, we can actually still render that data in aggregate, as we'll see in the map view. So we can actually get widgets that say, hey, there's 20 million points in this location, and there's different things like that. So all that data is still there behind the scenes, but visually, we make sure that's rendered effectively on the web without you really having to do anything, which is really cool. Now, you notice at the top here, there's a few other options. So over here, if you do want to delete this table, you can. I don't think you can with this data set because it's public, but if with your data, if you need to get rid of it, that's where you can go. And there's 4 options here to create different data from. I can create a map directly from this here by clicking Create Map. I can create a new workflow and kick off a workflow with this data set here, which we'll cover momentarily. I can create a new tile set from this. Should I want to create a tile set, just like the tile sets we'll see below, or I can enrich that table. Should I want to enrich that with more data? And this is another cool option that you can actually enrich some data. So we'll do all of that momentarily and actually show you how to do that through the workflow interface, which is a very effective way to do that. But just as an example here, I can go ahead and enrich this table here. You can see that enrichment comes from the data observatory in this interface, but you can also do that with your own data. And what you can do here is basically for these locations, there are points. If I had, let's say, a demographic data set of county population for every single point in that data set, I'll be able to extract the population of that county at that exact location. But let's imagine for a second that I have 2 polygons, this buffer or this circle here represented by this circle D, and then these other surrounding polygons C, A, and D. Now, for example, in A, this circle overlaps 50% of that area, and that represents 50%. So we'll count 50% of that population. Imagine that each of them have 100 people in them. We'll count 100 of that value. For C, that's 30%. We'll count 30 people. And here we count 20% or 20. So that would add up to a full 100 in the circle, but accounting for the exact numbers from those areas. Now, that's a pretty perfect real world example, but in any case, that does that at scale for this type of enrichment, which is really powerful. And what you can do is you can actually select any of your data observatory data sets, which we'll cover in a minute. So imagine that I'm here in the United States, I want to use the American Community Survey. And for some reason, maybe I want to see what the sociodemographics were in 2010 for each of these cell towers. And what I can do here is grab the total population, and I can do aggregates here, sum, min, max, average, or counts across every element in the data set. And what this will do, if we say continue, is it'll add here, and I can actually add that as a column, and I can create that new enriched table from that. So I can enrich all this data very effectively at scale. So if you want to do that kind of spatial joining to other data sets, that's quite easy to do there. So before we move forward, what we'll actually do is go into this organization data here. And so you have private and shared, but you'll see this button at the top right here for importing data. So I want you to go ahead and click that. Make sure you've downloaded that file that we talked about before, but we'll go ahead and hit import there. And this allows you to import a variety of different data sources into your data warehouse. So even if you don't have data there, you can bring data sets in here. And there's different file types. There's shape files, GeoPackages, CSV, KML, KMAZ, tabs, GeoJSON, and GeoParquet, which is the file type we're using today. Now, GeoParquet has a few advantages. You can store a lot more data on a lot less file size. It's quite compact as a data format. And you can actually import more data. So all of these file limit or file sizes here will stop at about 0.5 gigabyte or 412 megabytes. In addition, for GeoParquet, you can actually import a full gigabyte's worth of data, which is a lot more data than you could get with a shapefile or GeoJSON. But since it's so compact, you can actually import quite a bit. So what you want to do here, wherever you have downloaded that file, you can go ahead and browse that location. I'm going to go ahead here and grab this file here. So this should be the storms.parquet file that you downloaded from that link. If you don't have that, go ahead and head back up in the chat. You should see that link there and just hit open. Now you'll see this option here. If you want to link to like a live data set, like a online link or something like that, you can also do that too and just link out to that data set for something hosted online. And you could even just copy that link and paste it in there as well. Either way, whatever you want to do works for you. Next, go ahead and hit continue, and you'll see you have some options on where to import this. I'm going to import this to organization data, and then for this case into private. You can see I have some other data sets that I imported here, but I'll go ahead and hit save here. You can change the name of the table if you want to here, but we can go ahead and hit save. And then I recommend leaving this setting on for automatically defining the schema. So that will go through and figure out, okay, this is a date time field, this is a string field, this is a numeric field, so on and so forth. Now, the data we're looking at here is actually this NOAA storm data. There's different data for these different storm events. As you can see here, I pulled 2 years worth of data and combined it into a single file. So we have data from 2023 and 2020 through 2022 for storm data. If you want to see the source data, that's over here. So all you have to do is hit continue, and then it'll basically give you a confirmation window to say we're importing, and we'll go ahead and do that. So that's kind of our first task for today, is importing this data, and you can see where that lives. And I'll briefly touch on some other things that you can do from this window, from the Data Explorer. So we talked about enrichment, creating tile sets. You can also kick off a workflow or create a map. If your data does not come with geospatial data in it, like let's say you don't have a geometry column or something like that, you can actually geocode that. If you have a latitude and longitude, it'll just basically turn that into geometry. Or if you have an address data, you can geocode address data right from this window as well. There's also an option for large tables to optimize that table. So you can cluster by geometry, which allows it to read and render much more efficiently. So if your data is applicable to that, you'll see that option pop up. Usually that's only for tables that you haven't imported yourself. So if you actually haven't, if it's data already in your data warehouse, it'll do that. If you do import it, it will handle that automatically for you. So that's what's happening behind the scenes here. So that should upload, and we should get access to that in just a minute. It's a pretty small file, so it shouldn't take too long. But what you can do is just minimize out of here, and that will keep running in the background up here. So we can always check on that. But I imported that earlier. We can take a look at that. And here we go. Here's the file that you should be seeing. And here we go. We should see that it is 80K rows roughly. And here's all the storm events around the US from the past 2 years. You can see the data preview. We have some different information about when the storm started, the date, time, things like that. You can see all the different locations, where the storm was, month, the event type, some different storm features here, and some different information about potential damages, the source of the storm, if there's a magnitude tied to that. And then there's some interesting kind of description data here talking about what happened in the storm itself. So it tells you a little bit more about what's taking place. So that's it for the Data Explorer. There's a lot in there. to kind of talk about, but it does give you a lot to actually go through. So we actually did that. What we can actually do is also create a tile set of this here too. So if you want to go ahead and click that, we can create a very quick tile set just to visualize this at scale efficiently if you so choose to do so. So you can do that here just to illustrate that. Hit continue. It's actually going to give you a predefined name. You can hit save here. We can leave these settings as they were. So if you wanted to aggregate these or do anything like that, there's a lot more controls here for creating that. We'll hit continue. We can just select all the columns we want to include. If we want to include these different numeric values, you can select as many as you want there. And then hit continue and hit create. Now we have some of those pre-created sets here. If in the CARTO data warehouse, if you want to check out what a tile set looks like, we'll go down here, close this up and hit demo tile sets. So this will actually show you the amount of data that you can actually create in tile. So this is OpenStreetMap buildings. I always love to pull this one up because it's quite a bit of data that you can actually visualize. So this is aggregated by point. And as you zoom in here, you can start to see this will dynamically render a ton of data. So as we're zooming in and out, let's just zoom in, for example, let's go to New York City here, where I am today. And you'll see that the aggregated view are showing you, okay, there's this many count of buildings in this specific point at the zoom level. As we keep zooming in, it'll actually break down to the individual level. So you can actually see all those different points. So we've aggregated every single building, every single point from across the world in this tile set. And you can see that at scale. So if you have incredibly massive data, a tile set is a really effective way to visualize that. There's a lot you can do with tile sets, but just to illustrate how easy that was to create a tile set, sometimes tiles can seem, a bit burly or difficult to deal with. Creating tiles in CARTO is actually quite simple. And that should be, so I think our tile set was created here. If you want to check that out, now we have a tile set here. You've created your first tile set in CARTO. And there it is. There's your tiles that you've created. So very effective to do that very, very quickly. All right, so let's quickly move into the data observatory. What I'm going to do here is navigate to the left menu and click on Data Observatory over here. And this is the spatial data catalog that will actually let you kind of explore some different data that you have here. We're actually going to do the enrichment process in a sample workflow in a minute to actually show you how that works, to kind of get an estimate of, okay, how many people might be impacted by a storm or something like that. But this is the Data Explorer. Now, there's some different filters over here that are pretty self-explanatory, figuring out where the location of that data is, categories of data, as you can see here, the different license types. You can see there's premium and public data, the data sources or where the data is coming from, and then if it's a grid or a spatial index or different type of data there. So in this case, we kind of want to answer, let's say we want to answer a question of how many people are, impacted by an individual storm. So to do that as a very basic spatial question, where we'll create a small buffer around each point, and then we'll enrich that with some demographic data. So in that case, I want some population data. So for our cases, you can go ahead and first select this public data. So we'll limit to the data set that are free and easy to use. And since we know we're dealing with locations in the United States, we can go ahead and select that here. Now, once those filters apply, we'll be able to see what we have here. We have a lot of different options to actually do this. We could use data from the census, there's population grids. So we'll go ahead and use one of the population grid data sets that's available here. You can see we have these population mosaics. These are global data sets. So no matter the country you're working in, you can use these population mosaics completely around the globe. So we'll select the most recent one from 2020 here. So it's population mosaics 2020, and we can do the 1 kilometer grid since we don't need super granularity. There is a 100-meter grid option, but for our purposes today, this will definitely work just fine. Now, as you can see here, I can see a summary of the data. This data just has population in it. As you can see here, it gives me the country and the population in that area, and then I can actually get a sample of what that looks like on a map. So you can see here the population across these grids in Manhattan over here. Now, if you wanted to click into another data set, there's a lot more detail in some of the other data sets, as you'll see. So, if you want to play around with this, I recommend checking out some different data if you want to play around with that and see. But at least for our purposes today, we'll go with that 1 kilometer grid, population mosaics 2020. Make sure you're just using these same filters here. If you can't find it, go ahead and click down. We'll filter by world pop here. It's the provider. And that should give you the actual, data set we're looking for. So just to check in on the chat, just if you give me like a, thumbs up or say all good as you're following along here. If there's any questions, I think there's, we're still kind of answering some questions, but, just give me a, hey, I'm following along, I'm caught up, all good. All right, awesome. Thank you, everybody. So we'll go ahead and hit that. Now you should see here, there's a ability to access this data. You'll just have to go ahead and hit subscribe there. I'm already subscribed to that data set. You'll see a button here that says subscribe. Go ahead and hit that subscription, and then that will be tagged into your account. So check that out. Make sure you have access to that, and you have access, and then you can go ahead and click that access button once you get access there. That'll actually bring us back over to our Data Explorer, and you can see this now in this other tab over here for Data Observatory. So I'm in my World Pop section here, and you can see my subscriptions that I have access to here. This is a free subscription, so you can see that, and you get the same type of details about your data set, the IDs, data map, things like that. So that's a very kind of quick overview of the Data Observatory. If you want to query this data, you can actually query that here in your data warehouse. Once again, create a map, create a tile set, do anything here, unsubscribe, or even export some of that data should you see fit. So that's a very quick overview of Data Observatory and how to get access to different data there. Cool. So now we're getting into my favorite part of today, which is actually going through workflows. So we're going to do two different workflows today. One is a very simple one, like I just described, creating that buffer and enriching with population data. It's not too complicated. And then we'll walk through one that you can actually use from our Academy to import after this to play around with. So you can only cover so much in 60 minutes. But the first thing you want to do is hit plus here for new workflow. And you're going to select that CARTO data warehouse here. It should be one of the only options for you if you're in a new account. And then just hit create workflow. So I just, new workflow, once again, selected here and hit create workflow. And that will bring you to the workflow canvas. Now, if you're familiar with spatial analysis in any form, maybe you've used like a model builder in Esri or QGIS, or maybe like a processing toolbox in those desktop tools. Maybe you've used Alteryx or something like that to create these visual workflows. That's exactly the same thing that we're doing here. And you can kind of see here, there's two concepts for the sources of data, and then all your components to actually create, your analysis with. There's a lot of different components here. I can't get through possibly all of those today, but there's, basic things for data prep, doing countings or aggregations, counting points and polygons, doing summaries of points and polygons. There's data preparation. You can do a lot of different things here for generating, extracting from JSON data, dropping columns, sampling data, doing select statements, wheres, lots of stuff. We had a really cool thing for generating text from generative AI, which is really cool. You can do import export of data. So I can actually import files here directly into my workflow. So you can actually do that here and grab a file from the web if you want to do that. You can do spatial kind of accessors. There's spatial analysis, creating clusters or polygons or anything like that. All your spatial conversion, you can create isolines and routes. You can geocode here. Just working with the spatial indexes that we mentioned, doing spatial operations, calculating distances or lengths, and then all your spatial statistics functions. These are advanced spatial models that I'll point out in the Academy for you to take a look at. As you go forward and kind of take this afterwards, I definitely and very much recommend going here to academy.carto.com. I'll drop that link in the chat so you can check that out. And like I said, there's lots of tutorials here that you can play around with after the fact. We don't have time to do it all today, but the first thing here is kind of, you can get an introduction to workflows, but I want you to check out this workflows templates section. And what's really great here is, let's say I have a question about spatial analysis and I want to do a clustering, or if I want to do a find points of lines that fall in properties. You can just download this example. These data sets are already preloaded, so you can just import them. So if you download that example, go here and you can actually go back to your workspace here, and you see that button for import. You can select that file and import that. I'll show you how to do that in a second, but you can actually import any of these sample workflows and check those out at any time. So like I said, we're going to use that data for the storm data we've imported. So click on your organization data. If you follow along with my tutorial, that'll be in that private section here. And I'm just going to look for storms. So I can just start typing that. I should see storms here. And you're just going to drag that out into this canvas area and drop it on the screen. And that's it. That's going to load that data set up. You can see here, here's my storms data. Now we do need another data set, and that's from our data observatory. And what I want to pull in is that data from the world pop. So I'll scroll down here to world pop. Why can't I find it? Here we go, world pop. You're going to click into subscriptions. And then if we open this up a little bit, you're going to look for that 1 kilometer grid 2020 United States. So I can scroll all the way down here, and here we go. 1 kilometer United States 2020. I'm going to drop that into the map as well. Now, we want to see how many people are impacted within a certain area. For the storms data set, let's create a buffer around that. So I'm going to start typing for buffer. And you can see here we have the spatial operation for buffer. And that will populate off that geometry column. If you want to see what this data looks like at any time, just open this menu up down here. There's a tiny little arrow that pops up. You can see the data, the map, and then we'll talk about what this panel is in a minute. So what I want to do here is create that buffer. Let's look at a 3-mile radius around that location. So I enter that for 3 miles, and that will go ahead and set that up correctly. Now, if I go ahead and run this, you can go ahead and run here, and you'll see that this is actually going to process this workflow. You'll get a message here that this has started the execution of the workflow, and then momentarily, once that's complete, you'll see that that is run and complete, and we should have our buffers for these 80,000 locations. Now, automatically, this will get checked. So you will use cache results to actually showcase this, which is great, and actually cover what that looks like. So you'll create those buffer locations here, and you can use those results that are cached. So you don't have to keep reusing the same thing over and over or recreating. It's just going to use those results. So that's running on the background, and we'll get that all set up in a minute. While that's running here, we can go ahead and pop over and actually import a workflow that I want to show you. So if you head over to academy.carto.com, that link that we dropped in, let's go into insurance here. There's going to be a specific one here. And this is one I just built, which is actually looking at coastal flood risk. So you can go ahead and hit download here. That'll download a file. It should say ins coastal-flood-risk.sql. It's a SQL file. That's how we store everything from a SQL perspective. It's quite a small file. And then what I want to do is actually import that. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Go to my downloads. Lots of downloads here. So I think it's INS coastal flood risk here. It's going to go ahead and click open. And then you assign that to your data warehouse here. So I'm going to import that to our CARTO data warehouse. So download the file, import it, go from there, and hit create workflow. So that's going to create that workflow in the background. We can keep checking in and we can see, okay, this created all the buffers for 80,000 points in 50 seconds, 51 seconds. That's great. Now we want to enrich that and get the population. So what I can do here is actually, we'll look for the function enrich while the other one is importing. And what we want to do is enrich polygons. So let's go ahead and drag this over. And you can see here, there's 2 options. So this is the polygons we want to enrich. This is the buffers in this case. And we can just, to validate that we have everything here, we can see here's all of our storms, and we should see these nice little 3-mile buffers around all of our points, which is exactly what we want. So let's go ahead and take that and join it up over here. So that's our result set for the 80,000. And we'll go to the source table, which is the data we want to enrich with. We'll connect that over here. Now you'll see the options that you get. Basically, there's only one file here, or the one data type that you have, which is the population. We have our geometry buffer. We could use the points, but we want to use the buffer, of course. So you want to select the correct geometry. And then we have our geom over here. And then we have our population data, which is here. Let's get the sum, since we want to add up the population to see the number of people impacted by each storm. And then once that's set, you can go ahead and hit run. And that's going to run that enrichment step. The great part is that those buffers I already created are already stored. They're already cached. I don't need to create them again. So you can do that and have that set up for you and ready to go. So let's pop over to our coastal flood risk if you're following along. If you want to give me another thumbs up to make sure that you're all set following along, everything's good, that'd be great. And what we'll talk through, this is a much more complex workflow that you have here, that we're doing some different things, but we will run this one as well. Right now we're importing these files, but basically the example is that we're going to analyze flood risks for different properties in Savannah, Georgia. Now, Savannah is a coastal city in the United States. If you want to check it out, Savannah, Georgia. You can check that out here. You can see here it's in a low-lying area on the border of Georgia and South Carolina, right along the coast, so very subject to hurricanes. There's rivers and other bodies of water nearby, and it's a very beautiful historic city. Very cool location. So understanding that risk is important. And there's things that we want to study, such as the flood zones, right? The US publishes these flood risk zones area that's commonly used in insurance. But we might also want to study very specific things, such as these storm headwalls. These are locations that are sort of protecting from the water boundaries. And you can see here where these headwalls exist throughout the city. This is from their open data set. You can see where these areas are protecting these different storm inlets and water areas. And there's also these stormwater inlets, basically drains throughout the city. And you want to understand, okay, am I close to a drain? How close am I? How many are nearby? You can see here's all the different inlets and storm drains throughout the city. So you can see where those locations are. And those will pop up on the map. So you can see some streets have a lot. There's a ton of storm inlets on this street here, less over here. So closer I am to a storm drain, probably better. And then there's also some elevation data here. So I have some basic elevation data I've pulled in here. And I can go ahead and see what that looks like here. So what I'm going to do is create this kind of index score to figure out what that looks like. So the first step here is that I'm going to basically create these storm zones and join those to these Savannah property parcels, which are still importing here. So those parcels, I'm basically going to concatenate this address. There's an address field in this data. Once that pulls in, that basically has the different address components in different fields. I'll go ahead and concatenate that. I'm just going to filter to the addresses that aren't null, or some address don't have those address data in there. And I'm going to take a sample of that data, and then I'm going to geocode it. So this is where that geocoding comes in. You can actually see you can geocode your data here. So I'm actually using that address column, geocoding, and then getting that value back, which is really, really cool. And then what I'm doing here is getting these different flood zones. So as you pull these in, I have my flood zones in Savannah. I'm doing my spatial join to the actual flood zone. I have my stormwater inlets here, and I'm going to do two things. I'm going to find the distance to the nearest. So obviously, a closer I am to a storm drain, probably the better for my home, so I can get the water out of there. And then I want to figure out the count in the the number that are in a specific point. So counting points and polygons. So I create about another buffer here, about half a mile, and then figure out how many storm inlets I have within that half a mile. For the head walls, I want to find the distance to the nearest. So closer I am, probably more protected I am. Farther away, there's probably less protection. Or you could look at that in the inverse and say, if I'm near a head wall, that probably means I have more risk. So can interpret that two different ways. Then here, I'm going to go in and find the elevation for each one and find the location here. I'm turning this into quad bin. So my elevation is in a quad bin file, as you see here. If I look on the map, that will show up, and I actually have that in a quad bin. So I'm just going to turn my point into a quad bin, figure out that level, and then do the join. And the rest of the data, all I'm doing here is basically filtering out the columns I don't need. So I'm just getting rid of columns that I only want to keep, then doing some joining, dropping the irrelevant columns that I don't need anymore, and going through each of those, and then joining that into one final data set. So you can run this one in the background as you see fit. We'll pop back over here and see our enriched data. So you can see here that this is all finished up. The entire thing finished in about a minute, which is great. What I love about this is I've enriched 80,000 buffers with a data set of 9 million population mosaics. And if I click on my data here, I can go ahead and see I have my original polygons here with all my storm data. If I scroll all the way to the right, you can see here I have my population that's impacted. So for this one, there's nobody in that area. And for some of these other ones, you can see that there's 140 people or 50, 600 or things like that. Now this data is all set and ready to use. So what we can actually do is go ahead and create a map here. Now we don't necessarily need to represent the buffer itself. What we can do here is hit geom and go ahead and represent that. But we'll do one other thing before we get over there, is we're actually going to create a H3 grid from that point. So the last thing I want to do is hit H3, and I want to do H3 from geog point, and that'll do a spatial aggregation, so we can create some cool maps that way. You want to do that from the geometry, and we'll do that at level 9. So go ahead and hit run one more time if you're following along. This one's taking some time to load in. I don't know why it's taking so long, so apologies for that one. But I'll leave you to run this one in the background as you see fit. But we'll go ahead and do that last step here to get that H3 point And then we'll create our map from that, which will basically be just we can click create a map and go from there. And since everything's cached, that only took 20 seconds to run. And I can basically grab this file from here and start creating a map from that. So what's happening here is I'm actually aggregating this data, pulling that together and enriching that in this H3 view here. So first of all, let's go ahead and create a map from here. So all I have to do from this H3 view is just hit create map. I'm going to use the H3 column here and hit create map, and then I'm ready to go to create that actual map. So that's going to create a new builder map for us. It's going to load up our data sources and load that in. As that's loading, any questions on workflows, how to use that, questions there? Just checking in as we see here. And if there's any questions you have throughout this, just keep dropping those in. I'll go through and review those as we get through the rest of the webinar here. And as you can see, I now have my map for my H3 cells here across the US. So let's zoom all the way out. And we have all of our storm locations aggregated up in this H3 grid. And this is just a basic grid system that we have. And now we can basically create a map from this. We'll also create a map from the points here. So if you want to go back here, click on the enrich polygons, click on the geom, which is the points here, and we can create a map that way too, to show you two different views of that. But this is your builder interface. There's a lot we can do here to actually interact with our data. First thing is maybe you want to change your base map. So we have different options for our CARTO base map for different layers here. I can change that to a Google view base map. You can do the general Google map. I like using this Voyager one, a little bit more muted colors. So you have all these different options. If you wanted the hybrid satellite view, whatever you want here, and it's appropriate for a map, you can go ahead and change your base maps. We're also adding support for custom base maps coming up. We also have your table view here. So if you want to add more data sources, you could go to data explorer here. And this can go into any of your data sets that you've imported or any of the sample data sets that you have. So you can go to CARTO data warehouse, go to organization data or your demo data. You can go here and get any of that data set. So if you want to pull in some demo data here, any of the demo tables or any of the demo tile sets that you want to pull in, you can actually add those quite easily. So if you wanted to add OSM buildings, go ahead and add that source, and then you have your new tile set on your map. So we support, of course, multiple layers and things like that as well. So just another table view here. If I want to turn this layer off for the time being, go ahead and turn that off. And then to actually style your map, which is probably the most important part here. So if I click on that layer, I can rename that storm population and give your layer a new name. You can change the visibility by the zoom level. So if you don't want people to see that on a certain zoom level, you can turn that on and off. We're at zoom level 5. So as I move past that, you'll see that turn on or off. And then you can create an aggregation resolution here for the specific layer type. So that's a little bit too small. We'll keep it at that level, which looks good. Now, of course, you want to change the color of the fill here. You can do that, but you probably want to style that off of some sort of data. So if you click these three kind of filter icons here to the left of this toggle, you can turn that on. And then you're going to select a color here. And this is where we want to use that population column we imported. So we have the sum here, and then we want to get the sum in each of these cells. Since this is aggregating up on the different cell levels, it's going to automatically aggregate as we create up. So we're going to select sum and then sum. So the sum of the sum. And then you'll start to see the map fill in. So the darker areas are where there are storms where more population was impacted. The lighter cells are where there are fewer people impacted, which is kind of creating a population map of the United States for the most part. But we can always switch that. We could go, maybe you want to do an average of the sum and get a view of what that looks like. And we'll get, kind of a different view to see what that looks like, or maybe the minimum or the maximum, whatever that is. So you can play around with that. And then if you want to change these styles, you can change the color ramping here. You can go with the quantize, quantile method, different ones here. You can create a custom color scheme, whatever you want. And you can always change the styles of the fill colors here. So if I click here, there's a lot of color options. Let's say I want to create 8 steps of colors. I personally like this one here. I like this color scheme. You can see a sunrise with 8 different color options. There's lots of color options for categorical data, everything that you would want to use there. And then you can kind of change the opacity as well. So let's get rid of the stroke color here. We can start to see what this looks like from a population view. Obviously, lots of storms impacting some people. Then you have these outliers here. You have these, kind of areas where there was, some storms that impacted a ton of people in these different areas. Now, another cool feature is we can add some height or some 3-dimensionality to this. So I want to also create that off of that filter here. So you can create the population here, or there's also another numeric field here that we can look at for the damage to property. Some of these are, there's different injuries that factors. So if we want to look at direct injuries, we can take the sum of the injuries and start to see what that looks like and style the height based off of that data. So we can do that using these different factors here. You can kind of scale the, the potential height here. And then to get the 3D view, I can pop up here. So you can see there's definitely some very specific areas where these storms had high injuries. Start to see where those look like, obviously some in Denver and things like that. So you can start to see these trends start to pop out within the map here, and you could change any of these values at any time. Now, the last few things I'll mention here is that if you want to hover or get some interactivity with this, I can create a hover window here, different styling options. And let's say I want to get the actual sum as I go over with these areas. We'll give that and style the numeric by a different type. So if I want to give that by, an aggregate view, if I want the actual values and percentages or numbers, we'll use this one for now. And then you can start to see here is that here's the population in total impacted by all the storm events within 3 miles of those areas. And you can add as many fields as you want here. So if I wanted to, add more, add the, event narrative or things like that, I can certainly do that. Legends are automatically generated down here. So you can adjust these and label them as you see fit. If you want to customize the labels, those pop up right here and you can see those. And then there's a few other pieces here that we can kind of cover very briefly, but if you have a query layer, there's SQL parameters that allow you to do some more custom interactivity from a SQL querying perspective. If you want to add a source from a SQL query, you can do that here. Just write your SQL query in. So very easy to do that as well. And there's other, kind of features here. If you want to split map view, you can do that. Close the right panel here. And you can also kind of query this live here. But the most important part is probably your widgets. So let's say I want to get a view of the average, total number of people interacted here. We can actually see that there's, different options for a pie widget here. So let's say I want to look at the event type. We'll go with the mode value here. And then you can kind of see, okay, here's the, hail, thunderstorm, and I can actually do a live filtering here. So I just want to see events that had hail, and you'll be able to filter those. Thunderstorm. Let's look at marine thunderstorm wind. Obviously, that's going to be in our coastal areas. Flooding, where did that take place? Tornado, so on and so forth. So you can get some interactivity with these. You can add as many widgets as you want, rename them. And let's add another one here very quickly just to kind of highlight. We can go by category. Maybe there's a tabular view we want to have here for a specific table. You can add your columns here. Time series, should you have a date element to this? And then formula, which is a pretty popular one just to say, let's get the, we can just get the count of the number of features we're looking at. So in this case, we've seen that there's 1,500 storm objects in view. We can aggregate that up here and kind of zoom out. And as you zoom in and out, you'll see these numbers change and interact with that. So if we zoom into a specific area, let's say I'm really interested in flash flooding, where that's taking place. Oops, that's tornado. Flood and flash flood, you can see where those are. Then any injuries deriving from that. So that all works. You can also do that with the point data. Like I said, I pulled that in over here. So you can do that with the raw points as well, do the same type of styling. I'll leave that to you to kind of take that forward and go from there. But that's kind of all the different pieces that you can kind of create. There's, obviously your legends, your view modes, selections. If you want to select a different chunk of this data, this is another cool feature I love. Let's clear this out. And let's say I'm just really interested in what's happening in Chicago. Let's create a circle over Chicago and filter to that. And all my data is going to update based off of that. Or maybe I want to draw my own polygon. Create like a lasso tool. Let's just get this area here. Boom, I get my filters, and then I can sub-filter that data here as I see fit. So you can see there's 20 marine events here taking place in the storm field. And if you want to publish this map, go ahead and hit share. You can create this as a public map, copy my share link, and then I can share this with anyone on the web. Here's my map, and they will have access to all the same widgets and everything there. So yeah, lots you can do with the sharing of maps and everything here. So I know we're kind of at the top of the hour. I just kind of want to leave you with a few kind of leave behinds and things that you want to check out. We're really just scratching the surface of what we're able to do today. We've gotten through from taking your data in, viewing it, creating a workflow, creating a map from that, and publishing it. There's a lot that we didn't touch on. So there's a ton of things that you can do here by interacting and querying with your maps. We'll send some different information on SQL parameters, which is a ton of cool stuff you can do here. A lot with the spatial indexes and the visualization, scaling visualization, doing that at scale, doing this with a lot more data from the workflows perspective. Like I said, all those tutorials you want to check out is academy.carto.com. Anything you want to play around with here, go ahead and take one of these lessons. You click here and you'll actually be able to walk through what you can do, the different lessons here, learning all about these and actually kind of applying them to some different use cases in CARTO. So everything that you saw today, you can also replicate here. And then, in terms of kind of taking it a little bit further, I would check out the documentation as well, docs.carto.com, that talks a little bit about the Analytics Toolbox, which had some of those advanced functionalities that we talked about with spatial clustering and things like that. There's a lot of use cases here. If you want to check these out, you can see some different guides to actually creating these different things. There's some different examples in each of these as well. So if you pop back over to Academy, you can also see some different examples for using these different analytics toolboxes and functions and things like that. So there's a ton of tutorials here if you want to do spatial autocorrelation of POIs. There's actually, data that you can use here that's available, and you can follow these things step by step in CARTO to actually create these here. Space-time hotspots. We really scratched the surface today. Just kind of covering the basics, but that's your 60-minute introduction to CARTO from start to beginning. I just want to see if there's any questions here, or if there's any other things here that anyone had questions on. So I'll kind of scroll back here to see if I'm missing anything. So we had a question on point cloud data. We are able to work with the X and Y coordinate and visualize Z as a height, so you can kind of visualize some of the basic things like that. In terms of identifying some of the locations for like power lines and stuff like that, you do need to do some of the work on the database with that, but certainly doable to at least get that and visualize it into the data warehouse itself. I think we have some demos that kind of illustrate that. You can always create a point cloud tile layer and visualize those things too, but there's some extra work that happens there. This looks like someone had a hiccup getting the EU region set and the data population data. So apologies for that, but we'll get the recording over to you so you can follow that and still use the US region. So we have a specific question on some of the data that was acquired. So we'll have our team follow up with that. And check out that from your team. That's definitely doable. The public data you showed from the spatial data catalog to transfer to a site selection. That's certainly something you can do if you want to take that data out or create the site selection analysis in workflows, or if you're talking about from a specific application, we do have like a site selection application. Get in touch with us. We can check that out. And I think we can talk about that, but there's a few, if you want to go into workflows here, just as a quick illustration point in the Academy, there should be some workflows for CPG and retail. So if you want to check these out, this is one that estimates the population around your top stores, and then kind of identifying commercial hotspots. And there's some other kind of site selection use cases here. This webinar is recorded, so have access to that afterwards. And I think those were all the questions here, unless there are any more that pop up. Looking here, I think I got all of them. Cool. So I think that is everything I have for today. I really hope this was helpful. A lot of content in 60 minutes, but like I said, you have your account set up. I definitely recommend, there's some here in the Q&A, sorry. So the best way to find the metadata about these is in the actual Data Observatory website. That's like, if you search CARTO and Spatial Data Catalog, you should be able to find that and find some of the metadata. CARTO can be used in utilities company. Yes, we have a full web page that talks about use cases with utilities, analyzing power lines. Let's just go here and I'll show you. If you go to our website, check out solutions by industry, you should see utilities here. And then there's a whole section talking about utilities use cases that you can check out here. So lots that you can kind of play around with there. We have landscape, data, and shapefiles. How do you take that into CARTO using Postgres and display on the map? So yeah, if you have those files and you want to pull them into Postgres, you can either pull those shapefiles directly into Postgres, then connect that into CARTO. That's one option. Or if you want to connect your Postgres and use that drag and drop import feature that I showed you, that also works with Postgres that way. And then to actually build a spatial application with that, if you check out your account over here, there's a developer section, and you'll see there's some different tools on actually creating different tools and applications. So there's a ton of documentation down here, creating applications in React or DuckGL or things like that. That's, like I said, is a topic that would not be appropriate to cover in just one section of an hour. So yeah, we didn't have time to cover that today, but I hope that was helpful to at least get you started. So I think those covered the core ones, point clouds. Yeah. Okay. So I think I got all the questions there. But once again, thank you everyone for taking the time to join. You can check out all those resources I mentioned, academy.carto.com. Play around with those, give it a shot. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach us on our website or through your CARTO interface using that little question at the top. But thank you again. Appreciate it. And yeah, we'll see you next time.